Good morning, everyone. We're good back there? Wow, what a great group you are here today. Well, this message that I'm going to share with you today may be really, I think you're all too young to really relate to what I'm about to say here today, but some of you may be able to relate, but it's something that has been on my mind for a little while, and I got it in my noggin that I thought this was something that I really wanted to look into and address. Now, it's a bad idea to start a talk with a disclaimer, but let me just say that I hope this doesn't seem too much like you came to class today, but I want to talk about some concepts that I think help me anyway, to understand what I think is going on in the world today. Remember the age of Aquarius? Some of you do, or the new age. I think what we're going to do is, even though those two things are not equal, I'm going to use the two terms interchangeably. And I think of this as having its sort of main prominence back in the 60s and the 70s, but also into the 80s and into the 90s. And the way I see it is, it was really a time of expanding consciousness, of awareness, of peace and love and understanding, as the song related here. It's a time when we could really see the transformation of consciousness taking place before our eyes throughout the world. When the moon is in the 7th house and Jupiter aligns with Mars, then peace will guide the planets and love will steer the stars. I don't know about you, but I love that music. I mean, it just makes me feel good and puts a smile on my face to hear it. Now, I'm not an astrologer or a philosopher, but I have been a New Thought minister for a while. And it's true that we used to try to always make the distinction between New Thought and New Age, because they're very different things. But it was really during that period of time, New Thought, and Unity in particular, really had a period of considerable expansion. I remember when Eric Butterworth was on Oprah's show. This goes back a little ways. And Oprah, now Eric Butterworth was a well-known Unity minister and teacher, and he wrote a book called Discover the Power Within You. And I remember Oprah holding that book up and saying, "This book changed my life." And so it was really a period when it seemed like when I got into ministry, it was like New Thought religion was going to change the world. And I think it did in its own way, and it is changing the world. But anyway, I graduated from college in 1971, which certainly dates me, but I became a teacher of transcendental meditation in 1974, and I became a Unity minister in 1990. So I was right in the middle of all this. And we seemed to be on a trajectory at that time of transformation. Barriers were coming down around the world. It seemed like maybe war was no longer relevant. And the spiritual evolution of humankind on this planet seemed to be underway. We had this genre of wonderful New Thought, New Age music that had really a wonderful message. I don't know if it was ever sung at the Super Bowl during halftime. Maybe it was. I remember when they have a thing on YouTube with Michael Jackson singing about the children of the world. You know, that was back, I think, in the 90s. Maybe that comes kind of close. But we had the harmonic convergence. We had the world peace meditation, which, by the way, we still do that over in Prescott at New Year's. We had the human potential movement, the rise of personal growth, meditation, yoga, Findhorn, holistic health. The Berlin Wall came down during this period of time, and it was the end of the Soviet Union. And Brezhnev, who was leading the Soviet Union, was quoted as saying that we are entering a new age. The number of democracies in the world rose dramatically during the second half of the 20th century. By the way, the number of democracies, unfortunately, has fallen off a little since 2010. We had significant progress in the rights of women and minorities. We took the technology of the Second World War and used it to go to the moon. And I heard somebody recently say that in their opinion, going to the moon was the single greatest accomplishment of humankind. And it was a great thing, no matter how you slice it. It was an amazing achievement. Now, we know that there was quite a bit that was hokey about the New Age, but there was also a lot that was really great and exciting. Well, where do we find ourselves now? We seem to be in an era of cynicism and fear and glorification of the ego in public and private life. American citizens seem to be arming themselves with military weapons, and we're having to have armed guards at primary schools. Who would have thought that we'd have another war in Europe? I remember movies like Close Encounters and E.T. where beings from outer space were benevolent, and yet now it seems like all the movies are about horrendous monsters from outer space and zombies. It seems like it's sort of in some way, a reflection of our collective psyche. I think today, if you went on Twitter and to try to promote love and international relations, you'd probably be ripped apart online for suggesting the possibility. So what happened? Was all this talk about a new age of peace, love, and understanding, was it a mirage? Was the growth in consciousness that we thought we were seeing a delusion? Well, I think not. And I've spent quite a bit of time thinking about this because, frankly, I miss all of that age of Aquarius, new age stuff, and what seemed to me like the really coming down of barriers and opening up of possibilities all over the world. So I'd like to share with you my thoughts about the subject. And like I said, it's conceptual stuff. It may come across as a little academic, but I hope it can work for you. I do believe that the human race is evolving spiritually, and that we are moving in the direction of a more enlightened era that lays before us. And collectively and individually, we will be living at a higher level of consciousness in the not distant future. However, I believe that this progress is not made in a smooth and steady arc or trajectory. This world is a classroom. It's a classroom for our souls, and it's a very dynamic classroom. There is a lot going on. And I believe the progress that humankind makes is made in stages and steps, and there is a swing of a pendulum that takes place in the process of this growth. And if I put it probably in oversimplified terms, we could say that maybe this pendulum is swinging between love on the one hand and fear on the other, light on the one hand and darkness on the other. So I'm going to start by going back and taking a look at human history in the not too distant past. It wasn't all that long ago in the overall scheme of things that in the same millennium, Buddha and Jesus and Muhammad were born in that same period of about 1,000 years. And it seemed to me that what was taking place at that point was a shifting of consciousness on the planet, a shifting towards love and light. Now, it was a complicated thing that was going on, but I believe it was the beginning of a shift. During that period, democracy started in Greece, of course, and then it fell. There was a republic in Rome for a while, and then it fell. And so it seemed like that was one swing of the pendulum, perhaps. And then there was what is often just referred to as the Dark Ages. Now, I realized the Dark Ages, it was Europe, and it was not just one thing, but the fact is that the Dark Ages seemed to be a period of a lot of repression, a lot of kind of autocratic rule, and religious limitation. I mean, Christianity was happening, but it was happening behind, closed doors for the most part in monasteries. Then the pendulum swung again, and it seemed like the momentum changed as we moved into the Renaissance in Western culture. And there was an expansion of art and culture and religion and political life, and ultimately the expansion of democracy. Well, it seems like, as we look at the passage of history, it's generally kind of a mixed bag. But as we move into the early 1800s, yes, there's still a lot of conflict going on around the world. But when we move into the second half of the 1800s, there's an influx of spiritual teachers coming from the East into the Western world. It was really the beginning of that influx. It's also the time when New Thought began in its various forms. And I think it sort of had a culmination with the Parliament of World Religions that took place in 1893. And you may have heard of this. The Fillmores went to this thing. It was a enclave of people from all different religions all over the world. And I don't think there had ever been anything quite like it up to that point. Well, then perhaps we saw another swing of the pendulum with the first half of the 20th century, which turned out to be the most violent period in the history of the world, with World War I and World War II, with millions and millions of people dying. And I think with all of the awful stuff and the creation of weapons of mass destruction that still are a threat, but it was inevitable that we would see a swing back of the pendulum, and I believe we did in the second half of the 20th century. This is what we came to be calling the New Age, or the Age of Aquarius, or at least it was the dawning of something new, something new. And I think what's happening here is that this process of evolution of consciousness that's taking place in humankind is accelerating as time goes by. So here we saw in this period of the second half of the 20th century, a number of spiritual luminaries that, in my view, includes Krishnamurti, Yogananda, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, Ramana Maharishi, Eckhart Tolle, Byron Katie, and there were many great teachers that appeared and during this period of time, and some of them are still, thankfully, with us and doing a great work today. Also, there have been some noteworthy channeled material, including the Course in Miracles and works from Emmanuel and Abraham. And Christianity got kind of re-examined, I think, and it was really a time, especially for the expansion of New Thought. But throughout Christianity, I think there was kind of for many, a re-examination of what Christianity was really all about. There was also significant social figures like Gandhi and King. With all of this going on, it seemed like it was inevitable that we'd see the pendulum swing once again. So now we're in a period of time when there's a lot that's pretty sobering that is taking place. But I would like to say that on an important level, even though it may seem like this collective evolution of consciousness has kind of ground to a halt, the truth is that below the surface, below the headlines, there is still a powerful momentum for spiritual growth that is underway. Well, I'd like to share what I think is a perspective about this process of spiritual growth the dynamics of it. And this is the part where it might seem a little bit like a classroom. I have a few of these. I didn't expect so many of you here today. But I'm going to hand this out. See if this is useful. Now you're going to probably have to share these because like I said, I didn't make nearly enough, but what I want to do is talk about Hegel. Now, I know here we are, we're getting into philosophy here, and I'm not a philosopher, and I've tried reading Hegel, and it's pretty, for my brain, it's pretty impenetrable. But there is a quote that I put on this piece of paper that I think kind of captures what I want to say about it. This actually came from Wikipedia. I was looking online, and it says, in the idealistic philosophical theory of the German George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis are the three phases of an evolutionary process of the human spirit that repeats itself in search of truth. So, what I'm going to try to explain, as I think I understand it, is that this process of spiritual evolution has a cycle that it goes through. First, a new thesis arises. A thesis is basically just a new idea. And what I think we'll use as an example is Jesus as presenting a new thesis when he emerged on the scene. Now we could have a whole discussion about what the essence of his thesis was, but I'm going to say that it was this: God is love, we are one with God, and the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It seems to me that that was really his thesis. Now, the second stage of what I've tried to do with these arrows is point out that the second stage of this is the antithesis or antithesis. And what it basically is about is the fact that when this new idea emerges in the consciousness of people, or the whole planet in a sense, that which is unlike it comes to the surface and pushes back. Now, in the case of Jesus, there was a great deal of pushback. What we might call the unenlightened ego just felt threatened by this truth, and it rose up and pushed back. Jesus was crucified. His followers were fed to the lions. And that was the expression of the antithesis, the swinging back of the pendulum. But what comes out of this is something that we might refer to, what Hegel referred to as the synthesis. We have the seed of this idea, which is the thesis. And then the conflict comes with the pushback of the antithesis, but something comes out of it. There's a merging of these two in a way that gives us a synthesis. It's a new step. So in this case, from my perspective, the synthesis was Christianity. Now, it wasn't a pure expression of what Jesus was trying to teach, but it was a merger of Jesus' concepts and the culture of the Western civilization, or the world civilization into which it was born. But it was a step. It was a step in a new direction. And this is what Hegel seems to be saying is a process that takes place again and again. There's a new idea. There's a new thesis. In this case, a transformative statement of truth that Jesus was making. But the old ideas, the old ego was threatened by it. It brought up fear. It pushed back. But something came out of this, and that was the synthesis. So, from a historical point of view, I think this pendulum has been swinging back and forth, and that's really what's at the bottom of this page. It seems to me that following the time of Jesus, we did have Christianity on the scene, but then we moved into these dark ages, which were quite limiting. Then the pendulum swung back with the Renaissance and a whole different idea about art and beauty and religion. And then we got into the, as I mentioned, into the 1800s, and there was a continued swing of the pendulum back and forth. Well, there's another way of approaching this that I would like to mention, not to complicate things any more than necessary, but that is a unity perspective. Some of you may be familiar with the book, Lessons in Truth, which is considered a very important teaching book in unity. And there is a section in it that describes something that is referred to as chemicalization. That's the term they used to use back in the day. And I'm going to read to you a little from Lessons in Truth. And of course, you know, here we're talking about language that goes back 100 years. So it's not exactly the language we would use today, but suppose a man has lived in wrong thought and molded his body by wrong thinking for years, until, as you might say, he has become solidified in that wrong belief. You introduce the truth to him by strong denials and affirmations, as has been taught. The very newness of it, and because it is truth, creates in the first few days new hope, new joy, and health. And after a little time, a sort of mental ferment of agitation takes place. One is apt to feel very nervous and seared way down to the depths of himself. All the new beliefs that lifted him into a new world for a few days seem failures, and he seems to be on the verge of a breakdown. What has happened? Why, simply this. There has been a clash between the old condition, which was based on falsehood, fear, and wrong ways of thinking, and the new thought or truth entering into you. The old mortal is kicking vigorously against the truth. If you have a feeling of discouragement or fear, you may have a feeling of discouragement or fear. Then it goes on to say, should you find yourself in the state of internal aggravation, you need only affirm, there is nothing to fear, absolutely nothing to fear. Perfect love reigns and all is good. Peace, be still. And very soon, the brighter conditions will appear and you will find yourself on a much higher plane than you have ever been before. It seems to me that this basically describes the same process that Hegel was talking about. We have a new thought, a new idea, and it lifts us up, whether it's individually or collectively. And then the old ego gets stirred up by this and pushes back, and we might go through some difficult stuff. And it seems to me that this is applicable both in our personal lives, and maybe some of you have had an experience where you first came into contact with these truth teachings and it was very uplifting, but then stuff happened. And you found it, you had to go through some period of time of working through that. Well, I think it's, like I said, I think it's the same thing he's teaching. This is the same teaching as Hegel's. And what we are going through right now is really the pushback to what was characterized as the age of Aquarius, or new thought, that whole new idea about a world of peace and understanding. There is a benevolent, loving power, force that is moving this evolution forward, that is moving us collectively and individually towards a higher state of consciousness. And there is a process through which this is taking place. Sometimes it may seem like we're taking a step backward, but I think the way this works is that it's more like 2 steps forward, and maybe we do take a step back and then 2 steps forward and another step back, but we are making progress. So what is ours today? What is ours to do? I believe this is really a very important time. We may be discouraged and tempted to get afraid and angry about things that are going on in the world around us. The tendency might be to close down our hearts in a sense of sort of protecting ourselves, feeling defensive. But I believe it is a time to take heart and know that this is part of a process. If we can look at the bigger picture, this is part of a process that is moving us individually and collectively into a new, call it a new age, call it whatever you will, but a new era of greater peace and love, understanding and consciousness of the truth that lives in and through each one of us. I think it's a time to stay centered to the best of our ability and allow life to flow. Instead of getting into a place of letting our ego get stirred up and pushing back, I think it's a time to move into a place where we're as centered as we can be and allow life to flow. Allow what is to be, do what is ours to do, but don't let it push us into a place of negativity. The universe, life, spirit is in charge. Sometimes it might not look that way, but ultimately, spirit, life is in charge, and we can trust that there is a greater good that is unfolding. And so let's take this thought into prayer here for a moment, into the silence, not quite silence, but into a quieter place. And maybe I invite you to take a breath, an inhale and exhale. We'll just focus on our breathing for a moment. First, we inhale, and then we exhale. We inhale, and then we exhale. And let's take a moment to put our attention behind our heart, where we feel centered, where we are in touch with our oneness with spirit. This place of wholeness, of peace, this is who we really are. And when the challenging circumstances arise in our personal life or in the headlines that we see every day, we just allow that to move through our consciousness. We stay centered in that truth of the light and the life of spirit within. God is in charge. We can let go and let God. And know that the actors in our world are moving through dramas that we can observe without letting them move us into a place of fear or negativity. As they used to say in those songs from that period of time, love is the answer. And we can declare ourselves open and receptive to the expression of that love in and through us. The work of Spirit is underway. It's not always apparent. But that Spirit of life and light is ever with us. And so it is with grateful hearts that today we celebrate the gift of life. And we trust. We trust that God is at work in our lives and in our world. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Amen.